All right, so here we are again. Now, I do want to remind everybody, because this is kind of unusual, that next Monday we're actually off. Yes, we are. In fact, if you look at the website, the purchase website, you'll see that they randomly chose 3 days to give us off to somewhat compensate for the lack of a spring break. Just so happens that Monday is one of those days. You can see it right here. So, well, surprise, surprise. So that means we don't have any class next Monday. But of course, then on Thursday, we'll be back to normal. And then sometime after that, let's look at this calendar for a second. Yeah, somehow it's, let me get another calendar. I always get confused when it doesn't start with Sunday. Yes, yeah, that hasn't changed. Yes. Okay, midnight. So you'll actually have extra time on Monday to do it. I think that works out very well, don't you? Yes.
Hold up, where's the midterm at? Where?
Oh,
Sorry.
it's on it should be on Moodle. Let me go make sure I'm not imagining things. Now there's a lot of stuff on Moodle. It's possible that you didn't see where it was located.
Yeah, I didn't see it.
Oh boy, I hope that doesn't mean that I forgot to put it there. So let me just look. I'm pretty sure I put it there, but let's just double check. It's there. Oh yes, good.
Wait, can I see it? So, and it's due Monday, you said, right?
Yeah, Monday at midnight.
And email it to you at doctora12@gmail.com or no?
Yeah, either that or my purchase account. It's fine.
Where is your purchase account? Sorry to ask.
Oh, it's just Alan. I think it's just alan.anderson@purchase.edu.
All right.
So let's see. Scroll down. There it is, right there. Midterm number 2.
All right, that's it. All right, you'll have it.
Now, there's also, if you notice, there are 3 problem sets. The last 3 chapters that we're doing in this course are 10, 11, and 12. So as a preparation for the final exam, what I'd like you to do between now and next Thursday, and you'll have plenty of time, is to work on these last 3 problem sets, 10, 11, and 12. And then when that's done, we can go and do the final sample final, which I don't think I've finished that yet, but I will very soon. And then we'll be done on, I think, the 10th of May. Oh, the midterm 1, those are in the grade book on Moodle. If you can't see it there, you can just send me an email and I'll tell you what you got. But there's a grade.
I didn't get my grade midterm for number 1 because I emailed it to you.
All right, I'll look into it. I'll double check everybody's and see what's going on. Occasionally,
at gmail.com. Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah. Did you by any chance use Pages for your exam?
No, what I did was, because you had like problem sets too. So what I did was I answered the questions, and then with the problem sets, I just wrote them on a piece of paper and took a picture of them and emailed it to you.
Oh, okay. Well, I'll look into it. I'm pretty sure there are 1 or 2 people who use Pages, and I can't read Pages. So except for that, everybody should have theirs in the grade book in Moodle. And if it's not, I'll double check and see if there's anything there that occasionally what happens is when people send me their exams, somehow they end up either getting into the junk box or else they don't get delivered at all. And it does occasionally happen. So I'll go back and investigate. If there's any that are not accounted for, I'll get in touch with you and let you know what's going on.
The only thing that we've handed in is the midterm, right? Like we didn't have to.
First one.
Okay, all right.
Yeah, you were not required.
That's just for like practice, right?
Yeah, the others are just for practice. You were not supposed to hand those in.
Okay.
Just the test. That's right. Okay. All right. So anyway, yes. So as I started to say, with May, the month of May, let's grab this one. So yeah, today's the 29th. So we're off on the 3rd. We'll have class on the 6th. And then now the final exams start on the 13th. So that means our very last class will be Monday the 10th. And that's probably when we're going to do the final sample final. It's possible that we'll be able to start it on the 6th, but we'll play it by ear. If we can get everything done on the 6th, we may not need to meet on the 10th at all, but we'll play that by ear. But officially, the 10th is our last scheduled class. The finals are supposed to be done. Now, if we're doing an in-person normal classroom setting, then what would have happened is we would have had our exam either on Thursday the 13th in person, or else it would have been the following Monday the 17th. So because of that, for the final, you'll have actually a little more time than you normally do to get the exam done, because I don't think that they will expect the grades to be ready until at least Monday the 17th, if not later than that. So I will look into that and get back to you about that. But in the meantime, what we would like to do is focus on chapter 12, and also don't forget to take a look at the problem sets 10, 11, and 12, so that we'll be ready to go over those on the 6th. And then, of course, that would still leave us with the sample final. And also, we may not completely finish chapter 12 today anyway. So, but either way, we're wrapping it up. We're almost done. Our last class might be the 6th, but it'll probably be the 10th. And then you'll have, at least a week plus to get your final exam done at home as usual. And then that'll be that. And then if you're majoring in economics, well, then you grab some more economics classes in the fall. If you're not, well, then you could still take some other electives, like maybe if you haven't taken micro yet, that might be a thought, because micro and macro go together like bookends. So if you have one, you should have the other one. And as you know, I mean, obviously, if you're not majoring in economics, it's still very interesting and important in its own right. And it forms the foundation for any business courses you may take now or possibly in graduate school. Okay, well, anyway, so let's carry on. So let's see, chapter 12. I believe that's our introduction to monetary policy. Let me just go get it out. All right, 12 it is. So 12 is, in fact, money, interest, and inflation. Okay, so we're going to be looking at money. In the last chapter, we looked at the definition of money and the functions of money, but now our focus is more on monetary policy and how the Federal Reserve System can influence the level of interest rates in the economy to carry out its policy objectives. Okay, so this is a little bit more involved, let's say, than the previous chapter, but it's also fun. So we're going to be looking at money and how the Fed can affect interest rates through its control of the money supply. And also there's a discussion at the end of the chapter about inflation and why it's so harmful to society. Now, money, as we know, we've been thinking of money in terms of checking deposits and currency. When people say the word money, they can mean a lot of different things. Here we need to be very precise. We mean currency plus checking deposits. Now, what do we know about money then? Well, money is very liquid, but it also provides us with either no rate of return at all or very, very little. In other words, you clearly do not earn interest by holding cash, and you earn a trivial amount of interest in a checking deposit. So you might need to keep a certain amount of money on hand at all times to cover routine expenses and also unexpected expenses. Like, you never know when your car might need $500 worth of repairs, let's say, or maybe you suddenly need to go to the doctor, and let's just say you have to pay a lot of money for drugs, or anything could happen. And so you want to keep money around for emergencies as well as routine requirements like the rent and the electricity and all the rest. What do you do with the rest of your funds? In other words, imagine you've accumulated money over the years by working. And let's say that you've managed to accumulate, let's say $100,000, and you're very proud of yourself. You've somehow accumulated $100,000 worth of savings. Would it make sense to keep all of that in the form of cash or checking deposits? Would that be a good move?
No, diversify it.
That's right. Let's just say that you only need like a quarter of that for routine expenses and emergencies. What you want to do is use the rest of it to earn a higher rate of return. If you don't, by the way, you'll never retire, because you'll never retire based on the interest that you're getting from your checking deposits or even savings deposits for that matter, most likely you'll want to switch some of your savings into some other types of financial securities that provide less liquidity, but a higher rate of return. So we're going to assume in this chapter, just to keep things simple, that the trade-off is between money and bonds, right? And bonds can be used in a very generic sense, but the idea here is that bonds provide a higher interest rate than you would get from simply holding money. And so you have to make a decision as to how much of your savings should be allocated to money and how much to other financial assets. So that raises an interesting question. Assuming, let's say, that you've set aside enough money to cover your normal expenses and emergencies, all the rest is available potentially to be split up between money and other financial assets. How do you make that decision? How much to allocate to the two? What exactly is it that's going to make your decision for you? That would be, number one, the nominal rate of interest. Now, for the entire economy, we also have to take into account the price level, the level of real GDP, and also financial technology. So in other words, for the economy as a whole, there are four basic factors that determine how much money is being held in the entire economy. For an individual, it will most likely come down to the nominal rate of interest, possibly the price level, if inflation is fairly high, and of course, financial technology. So we'll see what that's all about in a minute. Now, I think once before we wondered how much money was in circulation in the United States. And I remember we had a problem because they somehow discontinued that series that we were interested in. Let's try that again. I was very surprised. Yeah, see, they've apparently replaced within the last year, their definition of money suddenly become this thing called M1SL. Well, see, that's why it's all zeros, and then it just suddenly jumps up. Right here, this new measure of money is about $18 trillion. Okay, it sounds like a lot, but that's not much. You know, the US economy is enormous. So why don't we take a little detour here and see what they mean by M1SL. Oh, see, now even it's not even here, it's just M1. Oh, wait a minute. Here we go. Maybe there's an explanation here. Oh, here we go. Before May of 20, see, it's been less than a year. Before May of 2020, M1 consisted of currency outside the US Treasury, Federal Reserve banks, vaults of depository institutions, demand deposits of commercial banks, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Now, what have they done differently? Oh, they've added other liquid deposits consisting of OCDs. Wow. I'd have to look that one up. Savings deposits, including money market deposit accounts. So basically, they've widened up, they've made the definition of money a little bit more broad to include some somewhat illiquid assets that were not previously included in M1. Now, what's missing here is the reasons for doing this. But you know what this means, don't you? That means every economics textbook in the planet has to be updated to reflect this. Ooh, well, I guess these writers had better get cracking, because that's a pretty big difference. That surprises me. They don't normally change their definitions like this. And they did the same thing with them too, apparently. So, but anyway, you look at it, the amount of money in circulation is roughly $18.6 trillion, which is a great deal of money, but it does fluctuate depending on these variables that we're seeing here. So first, let's think about this. The nominal rate of interest, how would that affect your desire to hold money versus, let's say, bonds? Well, the way to look at it is this. Suppose that you could earn 2% interest by buying bonds. Oh, is that what they did? Why would they do that? No kidding. I'll have to look into this when we're done and see if I can find out an explanation. Maybe I'll call good old Jerome, my pal Jerome in Washington, who runs the Federal Reserve System. He'll get on the phone with me as soon as I call, I think, and he'll tell me everything I need to know about it. Maybe not. I'll get on the internet and you know who would have this? The Board of Governors probably has this on their website, but I'm just a little surprised to see this. But all right, anyway, so all right, let's think about this scenario. You've got some cash, you've got some checking deposits which are earning you next to no interest, and alternatively, you could put your savings into bonds and earn a 2% rate of interest. Well, the way to look at it is this: all the funds that you're keeping in your checking account or in your cash are funds that cannot also simultaneously earn a 2% rate of interest. So we refer to that sacrifice that you're making by holding money instead of bonds as an opportunity cost. And of course, remember, an opportunity cost is simply the value of something that we had to give up when we make a decision as to what to do with our resources. For example, the opportunity cost of going to the movies is maybe the enjoyment you could have gotten from a baseball game you might have gone to instead. Or for college students, in principle, you could be out working right now instead of being in school. Not that you would have gotten any great jobs, but you still could, in principle, have gone out and worked. And so the salary that you're giving up by being in college instead of working is known as an opportunity cost. It's something you have to give up to dedicate your full time to being in college. So here the opportunity cost is in terms of how much interest are we sacrificing by holding money instead of bonds or other deposits, types of assets as well. So if the interest rate on bonds is only 2%, then that opportunity cost is not very much, is it? No. I mean, you won't just suddenly say, oh my God, what am I doing holding all this money when I could be holding bonds that pay me 2%? So when the interest rate is very low, like it is now, the opportunity cost of holding money is extremely small. And in fact, it could be even less than 2%. But on the other hand, what if you read in the Wall Street Journal that now all of a sudden bonds are paying 10% instead of 2%? What might you be tempted to do? All right, suddenly it's 10. Oh, okay, 10% is available from bonds, and you're still earning next to nothing from your money holdings.
Buy
Well,
bonds or buy a short-term money market index fund?
you might, because now all of a sudden the opportunity cost of holding money is 10% instead of 2%. So you're saying to yourself, do I really need to hold this much money? Why do I have such a big balance in my checking account when I could use some of that to buy bonds and earn 10%? So in other words, people are always considering alternative ways of using their funds. And one of those is their savings between money and other interest-bearing securities like bonds. So as interest rates in the economy rise, people will hold less money and more bonds. Okay, so the demand for money, therefore, is inversely related to the level of interest rates in the economy. So right about now, when interest rates are at preposterously low levels, you would expect that the demand for money is quite large. If interest rates go back up to more normal levels, you'll see the demand for money start to shrink as people recognize that their opportunity costs are increasing. Okay, so now what we can do here is create what's called a money demand curve. And it's just like every other demand curve you've ever seen in your life. It's downward sloping, but what's different here is that on the vertical axis, we have the so-called nominal rate of interest, which means not adjusted for inflation. And let me just change something here. Just want to make it a little bigger so you can really see it better. There you go. The nominal rate is on the vertical axis. And here, instead of calling it the quantity of money, economists tend to call this real money balances, meaning that the inflation adjusted quantity of money that you're holding is what we'll call real money balances. And so there's going to be a direct trade-off here at high nominal rates of interest. People will not want to hold so much money because of the steep opportunity cost. As the nominal rate drops to levels like what we have now, then the demand for money should grow and people will hold more money and less bonds. So we have our traditional downward sloping money demand curve, because all demand curves you've ever seen in your life, except for the weird cases where they're flat or vertical, are downward sloping. They'll never be upward sloping. So therefore, the curve simply shows us that as nominal rates rise, the quantity demanded of real money balances falls and vice versa. Now, with that being said, what about prices? What do prices have to do with anything? If prices go up, the purchasing power of money declines. Now, if your motivation for holding money is to pay for all of your basic expenses and for emergencies, if the purchasing power of your holdings is going down, then you will need to increase them to maintain a constant level of purchasing power. All right, so let's say, for example, all of your expenses are tied to the rate of inflation. Your rent goes up with the rate of inflation. Your electricity bill goes up with the rate of inflation. Your food bill, all the rest. If you don't increase your money holdings, soon you'll find that your money is not enough to pay for your bills. So the only way to compensate for that is to increase the amount of money that you're holding. All right. Now, on the other hand, as far as the graph is concerned, what they've done here is they put real money balances on the horizontal axis, which means that because these are inflation adjusted as it is, for this curve, the price level will not cause it to shift around because we're assuming that we're looking at real money balances. So in other words, if you increase your nominal money holdings to make sure that your money holdings, your real money holdings are stable, then a change in prices theoretically should not affect the demand for real money balances. So they're saying here that a change in the price level in the economy should not cause a shift in this curve, because on the horizontal axis, we have real money balances rather than nominal money balances. Now, the third factor that we assume is affecting our demand for money is real GDP. And of course, as real GDP rises, everybody becomes more affluent. Now, imagine the following scenario. Suppose you are in the habit of keeping $1,000 in your checking account and let's say $100 worth of cash. Suppose that down the road, your income doubles. Would you continue to hold the same amount of funds in currency and in your checking account? What do you think?
Could you repeat that again? I'm sorry.
Yes, right. So imagine that right now you're in the habit of keeping $100 worth of cash. And let's make it simple. Let's say it's $100 worth of cash and $900 is in your checking account. As far as you're concerned, that's enough to cover your expenses. Then all of a sudden your income doubles. You get a big fat raise at work. Are you likely to keep holding $1,000 worth of money as a result of your income doubling?
If your anticipated expenses stay the same,
But would they? Now, what would you likely do if your income doubled? Would you maybe not move into a nicer apartment or buy a nicer car? Or, wouldn't you find that maybe your expenses are going up too because of your lifestyle?
might it depend on what stage of life you're in too, whether
Yes,
you're in
it will.
saving mode?
That's absolutely correct. If you're about to retire, you're not likely to splurge on a new car or a new apartment. But let's say you're 25 and your income doubles. What might you be tempted to do?
Definitely splurging.
That's right. So if your expenses are going up, your monthly car loan payments are going up, your rent is going up, well, then you'll almost certainly need to hold more money because remember, the money that you're holding is designed to cover your regular expenses. So as the country as a whole becomes more affluent, they tend to hold more bonds and more money. They tend to hold more of both. Because they're more affluent, they're likely to have more savings. And so they'll put some of that into money and some of it into bonds. So therefore, as we become more affluent, the demand for money will typically rise. All right, and so that's reflected in this next graph. And you can see an increase in demand always means a shift to the right. That hasn't changed. So the money demand curve shifts to the right because we are more affluent now. Okay. Or, you know, another way to think about it is, do you think Bill Gates has the same balance in his checking account as you and I do? No. Why? He's a regular guy, isn't he? Because he's crazy rich. He's probably got more money in his pocket than we have. Yes, he can save more. Exactly. Or Jeff Bezos. I mean, really, he's probably got more money in his wallet than you and I will earn in a year. It's just because he's so rich, he'll want to hold more money because his expenses are almost certainly larger than ours. And ours will grow over time too, hopefully, as we become more affluent and we start wanting nicer things. And therefore, our expenses start to go up. And before you know it, we have to hold more money to pay our bills. Now, on the other hand, if the economy starts to slow down or fall into a recession, then clearly the opposite will have to happen. All right, so when the economy slows down, the demand for money will drop. Okay, because people cut back on their expenditures when they're worried about their jobs. And so therefore the demand for money should drop. Now, what this does mean, though, is that over time, of course, the economy tends to grow. And so the demand for money curve would continuously shift to the right over time. Now, what about financial technology? We're all so spoiled these days. I don't know if you're aware of it or not, but there was a time when there were no ATMs. Yeah, that's right. There were no ATMs. In fact, I actually do not even remember when they started becoming available. Let's check this out. Mm, 60, no, okay. Maybe there was one in all of Manhattan, but I mean, how long have they been in generally? In other words, how long has it been since you could count on there being one in everywhere you go? I shouldn't have said when was it first introduced. When have they become? Oh my God. Well,
Widely.
why? Okay, let's.
How long have they been widely used?
All right, let's do that. How long have ATMs been widely used? That's the key that I wanted. Not when they were invented, I guess. Oh, for God's sake. Well, all right, let's say it's been 25 years or so, maybe 30. What happened before that? What if you ran out of money? What would you have to do?
Cash a check.
Cash a check in a bank. You had to go to a physical bank to get your money. And guess what? The banks didn't used to have such generous hours. In fact, now most banks are pretty much open all day. They might be open at night, and they're certainly open on Saturdays. Even commercial banks are open on Saturdays. There was a time when commercial banks were only open from 9 to 3 Monday through Friday. So what did you do? You had to make sure you had plenty of money in your wallet just in case you ran out, because you might not be able to get to the bank during those hours. In fact, at one point, while this was still going on, as a joke, banking was referred to as a 363 business, meaning that you would, let's see, how did that go again? You'd come in, 363 meant you would here it was. You would borrow money at 3%, you would lend it out at 6%, and you would be on the golf course by 3 p.m. It's 363. That's right. That's how it went. Not anymore. Oh my God. I mean, the competition is so ferocious. And a lot of that had to do with regulations. You know, the banks were more or less prevented from competing with each other. In fact, for the longest time, if you wanted a checking account, you could only get it at a commercial bank, not a savings bank. So there's a lot of intrusive regulations in the banking system, which meant it was extremely inconvenient for customers. So if you found yourself running out of cash over the weekend, you were in trouble because there's no place to get it. There's no open banks. So that means that in those days, people would have held a lot more money than they do now. All right. And when I say, I mean, you would have maybe brought your checkbook with you to buy things, and you would have also held a lot of cash in your wallet, much more than you would do now, because you know perfectly well that if you run out of money, you can just go to the nearest ATM and get it. And of course, you can use your debit or credit card for everything now anyway. So really, what's the point of holding so much money? So as technology keeps advancing, we see that the demand for money is going to fall because there are other alternatives to using money, and it's easy to get your hands on money if you run out of it. In fact, it's gotten to the point where you can actually, if you get a paycheck, you can take a picture of it and it automatically goes into your checking account. Boy, how convenient is that?
Direct deposit is even faster.
Is it? Yeah. Oh, no. Yeah, you're right. I have that too. But if you have somebody who insists on giving you a check for some reason, like it's a one-time only check, it's not a payroll check, you still have the ability to just take a picture and you're all set. And it clears very quickly. It used to be checks took a long time to clear. Like days, several business days. Now, pretty much everything is almost automatic because the technology. Now, what's interesting about technology, though, if we don't have to think about what happens if technology goes backwards, do we? Does technology ever go backwards?
No.
It does not. Although I can think of one exception. After the fall of the Roman Empire, a lot of technology was lost and had to be rediscovered during the Renaissance. Like, for example, apparently the knowledge of making cement disappeared with the Roman Empire, and it had to be rediscovered many centuries later. But let's just say we don't go back to the Dark Ages. Then I think it's a pretty good, solid statement that technology only advances. It only goes one way. So in this case, all we need to know is that as technology advances, which it does, it's relentless. You never know what they might come up with next. And like with your cell phone, you can actually now pay, like in a Starbucks, if you just wave your cell phone in front of this little scanner, it'll take the money out of your account right then and there. It's pretty cool. So, but as a general, it reduces the need for money. And of course, as we know, money has an opportunity cost. So if we don't need it, we're not going to hold it. All right. So that means the demand curve will shift to the left. So you can see two contradictory things are happening here. As our incomes rise, the demand for money is going up, but as technology advances, the demand for money is going down. So the two of them are kind of offsetting each other as the years go by. And so it would be interesting to see which of these effects is the more dominant of the two. Oh, I'm sure there's some very technical studies that have been done about this to see if money demand in general is rising or falling over time. Because you can see there's two different effects that could potentially increase it or decrease it. Now, the supply of money, we're going to make a very simple assumption here. We're going to assume that, that the supply comes from the Fed. Now, that's not 100% strictly speaking true, but to a large degree, the Fed is in control of how much money there is in circulation. The quantity of money can be directly affected by the Fed through its conduct of monetary policy. And their job, though, is to provide the right amount of money to keep the economy in a balance between low inflation and low unemployment. So they're not thinking about the level of interest rates and such. In other words, the supply of money doesn't respond to the change in interest rates. It's the other way around. The interest rate responds to changes in the money supply. So based on this framework that we have here, the supply curve is vertical. Okay, in other words, it is not being influenced by what's on the vertical axis. Therefore, that curve has to be vertical. All right, this is true for any graph, by the way. If you have something on your graph which is independent of the vertical axis, it will be expressed as a straight line like that. So guess what we're going to do now? Oh, no, first we have to see how monetary policy affects this curve. So remember, there's two basic types of monetary policy: expansionary, which is designed to stimulate the economy and reduce unemployment, and then contractionary, where we're trying to slow down the economy in order to reduce the rate of inflation. So the Fed has a tough job. They have to walk a tightrope between keeping unemployment low and inflation low. And I think I mentioned this analogy last time. It's like being the captain of a super tanker on the Mississippi River. When you decide to turn the steering wheel, the ship will not actually turn until a mile downriver. So you've got to know well in advance when you need to turn that ship, otherwise you'll never make your target. So the Fed is looking 1 to 2 years ahead in the economy when they make decisions about what to do about the money supply. Okay, they have to look way ahead because it takes time for monetary policy to affect the economy. Anyway, and by the way, what's interesting about all this is that the technology is actually making the Fed's job a lot harder. It used to be there was a very simple, predictable relationship between their changes in, let's say, reserves in the banking system and the money supply in the economy. Now, thanks to the technology, that relationship is a lot more unstable. It's a lot more unpredictable. So the Fed is dealing with a lot more uncertainty than ever before as they carry out monetary policy. But anyway, so with expansionary monetary policy, the purpose of raising the money supply is to lower interest rates. Okay, if they make more money available to the banking system through the form of reserves, the banks will respond by lending it out, and interest rates will start to drop because the availability of loanable funds is increasing. Once interest rates start to fall, guess what happens? Consumers buy more products and businesses start to invest more. All right, of course they do. And you know perfectly well, when are people most likely to buy a new house, for example? When mortgage rates are very low. So if they keep dropping, more and more people will buy new houses. Same thing with expensive items like cars. When do you want to buy a new car? Not when interest rates are high, but when they're very low, so that your monthly payments are as low as possible. Same thing with businesses. When would you want to expand the size of your business? When interest rates are low, so that it costs less money to borrow what you need to finance your expansion. So low interest rates will trigger an increase in consumer spending and investment spending. And since these two collectively account for something like 3/4 of the size of the economy, that's going to have a really major impact on the economy. In other words, lower interest rates will have a huge stimulative impact on real GDP. But if this carries on for too long, though, all this extra stimulus will eventually trigger a higher rate of inflation. So the Fed has to keep an eye on that because remember, their number one priority is to keep inflation in check. Specifically, their target is 2%. If it starts getting above 2, they will want to start taking actions to slow it down. But in the meantime, they want the economy to be as strong as possible. So again, you see they're walking a tightrope between keeping unemployment as low as possible and inflation as low as possible. And so therefore, if the Fed decides to engage in expansionary monetary policy, this curve will shift to the right, of course. Remember, in economics, whenever we have a graph like this, an increase in one of the variables means that that curve shifts to the right. A decrease shifts it to the left. All right, well now, you can probably guess what's coming next. What about the opposite case? What about contractionary monetary policy? That means the Fed is doing the opposite. They're withdrawing reserves from the banking system, so the banks have less money to lend out, and therefore interest rates start to creep up, and now consumers start to slow down their spending, as do businesses. The effect of that is to slow down real GDP. Now, you might think this is a terrible thing to do, but the reality is this is the only way to keep inflation from getting any higher. So the Fed will keep an eye on the economy. They study every region of the country. They have armies of experts watching all the different economic series. And so when they get together, when the FOMC gets together 8 times a year, they have tons and tons of information at their fingertips to tell them what's going on in the economy and where their staff economists think it's going. And they'll use all that information to come to a decision. Should we raise rates, or should we lower them, or should we leave them where they are? In fact, I think they just met earlier this week, didn't they? Hold on one second. I think they did. Let's see. There it is, 27-28. So the statement is right here. And basically, they want to explain to you what they're doing. Now, here, of course, this is something that was never had to be dealt with in past meetings. The COVID, there was no COVID until last year, of course. So the COVID is causing tremendous human and economic hardship, and indicators of economic activity and employment have strengthened. The sectors most adversely affected by the pandemic remain weak, but have shown improvement. Inflation has risen, largely reflecting transitory factors. That means that it has, but only due to temporary factors, which means that it sounds like they're optimistic that inflation is still under control. Overall, financial conditions remain accommodative, meaning that rates are very low, in part reflecting policy measures to support the economy and the flow of credit to U.S. households and businesses. All right, in other words, this is a conscious policy decision to allow households access to credit at low interest rates, and businesses as well, to make sure that the economy doesn't fall apart because of COVID. Now, the path of the economy will depend significantly on the course of the virus. Risks to the economic outlook remain. The committee seeks to achieve maximum employment and inflation at the rate of 2% over the long run. That's their target. They don't want it going above 2. With inflation running persistently below this longer run goal, the committee will aim to achieve inflation moderately above 2% for some time. So inflation averages 2% over time, and longer-term inflationary expectations will remain well anchored at 2. So in other words, they're saying we've had so little inflation in recent years that they can afford to let it get a little bit above 2, so that the long-run average remains at 2. So that sounds like they're prepared to keep interest rates low for a significant length of time. They expect to maintain an accommodative stance of monetary policy. Accommodative means that they want to keep rates as low as they can, okay, until these outcomes are achieved. So for the time being, they're keeping the target range for the federal funds rate at 0 to 1/4%. So in other words, there's a range within it which it can float between 0 and 1/4%. If it starts creeping outside that range, then they will step in and take actions to move it back in this range. They will continue here until labor market conditions have reached levels consistent with the committee's assessment of maximum employment and inflation has risen to 2% and is on track to moderately exceed 2% for some time. So in other words, they're not going to raise rates until they're worried that inflation has the potential to rise above 2% for a significant length of time, which means not anytime soon. And then they'll continue to increase its holdings of treasuries by at least $80 billion a month and mortgage-backed securities. So in other words, the Fed has all this money coming in the door. And so one of the things they do with it is to try to help reduce the federal deficit by buying up all these treasury securities. And of course, in the process, they also earn a lot of interest, which further increases the income that they receive every year. So they're doing pretty well as far as that goes. In assessing the appropriate stance of monetary policy, the committee will continue to monitor the implications of incoming information for the economic outlook, of course. They would be prepared to adjust the stance of monetary policy as appropriate if risks emerge that could impede the attainment of their goals. In other words, if all of a sudden inflation starts spiking up again, they may get together and start raising rates again. So they're not ruling that out, but they're basically telling us that it's not likely, given the conditions that they're seeing now. Anyway, so you can see there's the chairman, Jerome Powell, and there's all the rest of the members of the board, of which there are 12. As you know, 7 of these are governors, 5 of these are Federal Reserve District Bank presidents, one of which is the New York Fed president, who I'm embarrassed to admit I don't remember his name. Hold on one second. John C. Williams. Okay. So he's on that list somewhere, unless he was sick that day. There he is. Oh, they listed him second. Ooh. Oh, because he's considered to be the vice chair of the committee of the FOMC. I didn't notice that until now. The New York Fed chairman is the vice chair for the FOMC. That's how important he is to the system. Man. Anyway, the rest of this is all technical stuff. But this is in a nutshell what they're telling us. The meeting was yesterday. It ended yesterday. These things usually last 2 days. They have a lot to discuss. And at the end of the second day, they issue a release to the public in which they tell everybody why they did what they did, which in this case was to lower rates. Keep rates where they were. And here it even mentions that the interest rate, which we saw the other day, that they pay in reserves to the banks is 0.1%. Well, it's not much, but it's better than nothing, which until about 15 years ago, reserves did not pay any interest at all. And here they're just reinforcing, they've instructed the trading desk at the Federal Reserve Bank of New York to maintain transactions that, in other words, do whatever it takes to keep the Fed funds rate between 0 and 0.25%, increase their holdings of Treasury securities, and other stuff here that we don't care about. And the discount rate is 0.25%. This is the rate at which they'll lend money to banks that are in trouble. All right, so all that useful information came out of this one little press release issued by the FOMC. So anytime you're wondering what's going on with monetary policy, you can come right back here to this website and everything is right there. They're very good about making all this information available to the public. And if you want to look at the older ones, they're all here too. You never know. Okay, so anyway, so that's that. Now, contractionary, again, we're reducing the money supply to raise rates, to tighten up on the rate of inflation. And so naturally enough, that means that the money supply curve shifts to the left. Now we can bring them together, the money supply curve and the money demand curve. And that will enable us to determine the equilibrium level of interest rates in the economy. All right, so let's bring them together. And you can see right there at point E, we've achieved the equilibrium nominal rate of interest, which you can read off the vertical axis, and the quantity is down here. Now, what can happen is if we're not in equilibrium, for example, from traditional supply and demand curves, the market is not always in equilibrium. Let's say we're up here somewhere. Let's say right now, the equilibrium rate is 2%. But for whatever reason, the actual rate in the economy is 3. That implies that the money supply equals the money demand. So people use, and this, by the way, this is often referred to as a surplus. There's surplus money in the economy that people actually don't want to hold. So people use the surplus to buy bonds. And that means that bond prices rise. And as we saw in the previous chapter, or no, 2 chapters ago, when bond prices rise, interest rates fall. And so the rate will drop down to its correct level without any change from the Fed. Okay, so on the other hand, if we're down here somewhere, then the opposite happens. Here we have the money demand being greater than the money supply. So down here, the opposite is happening, which means people sell bonds to hold more money. And therefore, bond prices fall. And interest rates rise. So in other words, this is a self-correcting market, just like any other one. If we're not in equilibrium, there's an automatic tendency for these variables to adjust until we find ourselves back in equilibrium. And then there's no need for any more changes. Everybody's happy where they are. They're holding the amount of money they want to hold, and the amount of money that's available exactly matches what they want to hold. And so we'll find ourselves automatically gravitating back towards the equilibrium rate of interest. Well, that's interesting. Now, having said all that, what if there's a change in one of these factors and one of the curve shifts? Well, we've already seen this before in other applications. So for example, what happens if the demand for money increases? And so here it is. An increase in money can be caused by an increase in real GDP. People are more affluent, they hold more bonds, and they hold more money. This leads to an increase in the nominal rate of interest, as well as, but no change in the quantity of money, because the Fed is not changing the money supply. So in other words, this rightward shift is caused by an increase in real GDP. And you can see the interest rate went up, but the quantity didn't change. And over time, I mean, if you look at data over time, you'll see that when the economy is expanding, then interest rates tend to go up because people want to hold more money because they're becoming more affluent. On the other hand, if the economy is slumping, the opposite should happen. So let's look at that graph. And this could be what's happening. Let's say there's a recession. And so naturally enough, the interest rate drops in this case. Now, what about the supply curve? Now, we know that the supply curve will shift around if the Fed engages in different types of monetary policy. All right, so of course, that will have to have an effect on the nominal rate of interest. So let's see how that would work with these graphs. So we'll start with expansionary monetary policy, which, as you know, means that the money supply goes up. The impact will be a reduced nominal rate of interest, but also an increase in the quantity of real money balances being held. That we haven't seen yet because the supply itself is changing. So what we have here is, we'll call it expansionary monetary policy. Okay. And of course, the whole point of it is that the money supply increases, therefore the money supply curve shifts to the right. And where it intersects with the original money demand curve, we can see that rates are lower and the quantity of money being held is higher. And that's what they're after, of course. I mean, when the Fed engages in expansionary monetary policy, the whole point of it is to lower interest rates to stimulate the economy. So I'm sure you can guess what's coming next. What about contractionary monetary policy? That would, of course, have exactly the opposite effect because the money supply curve will shift to the left. And so let's confirm that. Yes, this is, again, what we would call contractionary monetary policy. Money supply falls, and the result is that interest rates go up. Okay, so basically what we're showing with this framework is what happens when there's a change in monetary policy and also when there's a change in the state of the economy. The case with advancing financial technology, we already know that that simply means that the demand curve shifts to the left. All right, but that doesn't happen that quickly. So these are the two that we really want to focus on. So yes, it may seem like it, but yes, technology doesn't advance. Well, certainly the money supply can be changed much more quickly than technology can advance. Let's put it that way. So we want to focus our attention on changes in monetary policy and changes in real GDP. Now, inflation. There's a discussion here about inflation, which is a little bit different than what we've been seeing. In the long run, as we know, expansionary monetary policy can only do one thing, and that's increase the rate of inflation. Because in effect, what's happening is you're increasing the amount of money available to buy this roughly the same quantity of goods and services. So the only way that can come out is with higher prices. Okay, but this is a long run process. It doesn't happen overnight. And of course, in countries which we've seen, which have enormous rates of inflation, money supply was increasing at astronomical rates because the governments involved couldn't pay their bills and they just printed money. And of course, what did they expect? Hyperinflation. So in the short run, we know that the nominal rate of interest adjusts to ensure that the quantity supplied of money equals the quantity demanded. We're going to make the claim, though, here that in the long run, it's prices that are adjusting to guarantee that there's an equality between quantity supplied and quantity demanded. Now, remember, in the short run, prices are soon to be fixed. So inflation, according to this assumption, is a long-term effect. In the long run, prices will adjust to ensure equality or maintain equilibrium in the money market. Okay, so now in the framework we're about to develop here, we're going to assume that in the long run, the economy will adjust itself until it finally reaches full employment. Okay, in other words, we're reaching that potential real GDP where all cyclical unemployment is gone. Now, we're also going to assume that, and this is probably not a ridiculous assumption, that the quantity of people that money hold, quantity of money that people want to hold is equal to or based on its purchasing power. Meaning that if prices go up 10%, you would want to increase your money holdings by 10% to maintain a constant purchasing power. All right, so with those assumptions in place, there's one more, the quantity theory of money. I believe we did see this in one of our videos. The quantity theory of money has been around for a long time. I don't remember exactly who's responsible for this, but it's been around since at least, I would say, the 1700s. Let me just check this out, just out of curiosity. Oh no, Keynes. Oh no, but he based it on the writings of the classical economists. I would disagree with what they're saying there. I think that the quantity theory of money is older than that. Here we go. The theory, oh my God, it was originally formulated by the Polish mathematician Nicholas Copernicus, who you probably know better as an astronomer. And he was influentially restated by philosophers John Locke, David Hume, and Jean Baudin, and later on by Milton Friedman and Anna Schwartz when they wrote the monetary history of the United States from 1867 to 1960, which is a very intense study of the history of money in the United States going back to the Civil War. And this is actually the foundation of the monetary school, because they were able to show that a lot of business cycles throughout US history were directly related to the growth of the money supply. So this was kind of a big deal. This is one of Milton Friedman's claims to fame. And he did, of course, eventually win the Nobel Prize in economics. But anyway, so the quantity theory of money tells us that with all of the assumptions we're making, an increase in the money supply is simply matched by an increase in the price level, which in effect assumes or kind of implies that monetary policy in the long run will be ineffective. Because if the Fed raises, let's say, the money supply by 10%, the only thing that will happen is that prices will go up 10%, and then nothing has changed in real terms. But the formulation of it is right here, MV equals PY. We call this the equation of exchange. And what is it telling us? All right, well, that's a good question. MV equals PY. So let me copy this onto the next slide so we can see what we're doing. MV equals PY. M is the nominal money supply. V is velocity, which means how many times a year is the same dollar spent. P is the price level, and Y is real GDP. So what that means then is that if you multiply these together, the right-hand side of this equation is actually nominal GDP. Now, often with a quantity theory of money, we assume that over a fairly short period of time, velocity and real GDP will remain relatively fixed. In other words, they don't change that much. So what a lot of books do, they'll put a little bar over the top to indicate these are fixed. Okay. And Y will also assume is fixed. Now, that implies that whatever increase there is in M, the nominal money supply is exactly matched by the price level. So if M goes up 10%, P also must go up 10%. So that, in other words, like I said, if the Fed raises the money supply by 10%, the only impact will be an increase in prices of 10%, which means that they're wasting their time, that it will not have any effect on the real GDP of the economy. P is, yes, P could be thought of as a CPI, exactly. Yeah, it's the price level. That's a good point. You can think of P as being CPI. It's the price level that represents the cost of all goods and services in the country. Now, the book introduces a long-run demand curve for money at this point, which is different from the short-run demand curve for money. They're going to make the following claim. They're going to make the claim that the value of money, like I said before, ultimately comes down to its purchasing power. So, and this is the book's framework. The value of money is defined to represent its purchasing power. So you can make the case that the value of money could be written as, and this is what they're doing in the book, 1 divided by the price level divided by 100, where 100 or P rather, is the index. In other words, if P is the CPI, in the year, let's say last year, the CPI was about, let's say 270. That means according to this framework, the value of money last year was and that means approximately one over 270 over 100 equals about 0.37. So that basically means that a $2020 has the same purchasing power as 37 cents in the base year. All right. So in other words, in some ways, it's kind of interesting to think about it this way. Instead of saying, well, all right, well, the base year, remember, the base year for this is the range from 1982 to 1984. We can think of it this way. Either you can think of it as prices are 2.7 times what they were in 1982 to 84, or, and this might even be a more meaningful way of thinking about it, a dollar today can buy what 37 cents could buy during the base year. Either way, you're getting a sense of how much prices have changed since the base year, how much purchasing power has declined for the dollar. So I don't know, I think they both have their place. They're both very helpful in trying to understand how much purchasing power has changed since the base year. It's just that here we can think of it as what does it cost? You know, what it cost to buy 37 cents in the base year now costs $1. So in this new framework that they're developing, what they're going to do is develop a new curve where the vertical axis is not the nominal rate of interest, but what they're calling the value of money, meaning the purchasing power of money. Okay, so you have the value of money. On the vertical axis, and down here we still have the quantity of money, but now you see how it's LR? LRMD stands for long run money demand. All right, and it's downward sloping, which means that the higher the value of money, the less we'll hold, and vice versa. Because we're assuming that we need to maintain a specific amount of money in real terms. Okay, so in other words, the more valuable the money is, the less we need to hold because it has a lot of purchasing power. As the value continues to decline, the purchasing power that is, we need to hold progressively more and more money so that in real terms, we can afford to buy the same things without money. So keep in mind, in the long run, we're assuming that prices are flexible. So, because otherwise this would make no sense in the short run when prices are fixed. So in the short run, we'll base our decisions about how much money to hold on the nominal rate of interest, but in the long run, it'll depend ultimately on purchasing power. So now we can come back and we can determine our equilibrium rate of interest by combining this with the money supply. That hasn't changed. The money supply is the amount that the Fed makes available to us. Ah, yes, there it is. So imagine, let's say that just to keep things simple, right now we're in the base year. So the value of money is $1. And let's also assume that the quantity is 1. Let's say that could be $1 trillion. What happens if the Fed increases the quantity of money by 10%? Okay, so this is 1 trillion. And this is 1. And the Fed decides to increase the quantity of money to 1.1 trillion. Let's see what happens. Now, clearly, the value of the money will decline. Okay, so let's take a look at this. So remember, went by 10%. So by the way, where did this come from? This is equal to 1 divided by 1.10. This one, on the other hand, this is equal to 1 times 1.10. So the value of money and the quantity of money are going in opposite directions. Here we're dividing by 1 plus the increase in the money supply. Here we're multiplying it. But if you notice, if you multiply these together, money holdings have not changed. Real money holdings have not changed. Because initially when we were here, the real money holdings were 1 trillion times 1. Whereas down here, we're looking at 0.91 times 1.10 million. And that product is just 1 trillion. So in other words, you see what's happened by the Fed increasing the money supply 10%. Guess what people did? The value dropped by 10% and people responded by holding another 10% so that their holdings in real terms have not changed. So that in the long run, what people are interested in is keeping in purchasing power terms the same amount of money holdings. So that's what this model is trying to tell us, okay? And of course, if we have expansionary monetary policy, this is expansionary, of course. Contractionary, of course, means the opposite happens. And if you look at the numbers, you'll see they look kind of familiar. So here, it's the other way around. This one equals 1 times 1.10. And down here, this is equal to 1 divided by 1.10. So the quantity is the same. If you look at E2, real money holdings, equal 1.10 times 0.91 trillion equals 1 trillion. Down here, we multiply it out 1 times 1. It was just 1 times 1. It's very simple. And so again, the whole idea here is that people are trying to hold the same real quantity of money. And so if the Fed changes the amount that's available, that should affect the purchasing power of the money. And therefore, that'll affect our holdings. All right, so we're going to wrap this up with a very quick look at the four basic costs of inflation. Why is it so harmful? What kind of cost does it impose on society? Why should we avoid it like the plague? Well, all right, and there's four of them, and you can see that some of the names are a little bizarre. And you know, some of these really only manifest themselves when you have like hyperinflation, but still, these are the four of the ways in which inflation harms society. All right, what could they be? What is this all about? And these are the names that are used by economists. The book didn't just make these up. So tax costs. Now, you know that taxes are imposed in nominal wages, not real wages. So if our incomes rise just enough to keep up with the rate of inflation, we might find ourselves paying higher taxes. And anyway, now the tax code is to a certain degree indexed to the rate of inflation, but you still might find yourself paying more in spite of having the same real income. So therefore, any way you look at it, this has the potential at least to increase the amount of taxes that we get stuck paying. All right, now, of course, it also reduces the real return to saving and investing, which means people save less, interest rates go up, and we have less consumer spending and less investment spending. So this is where a lot of the harm comes from. If anything that causes rates to go up and a reduction of investment is going to reduce GDP growth in the future. And therefore, our standards of living will be lower than they otherwise would have been. Now, shoe leather costs. When inflation is getting out of hand, people spend more time looking for the best possible prices. It's kind of a strange name, but it refers to the idea that your shoes could wear out if you spend all your time looking around for better prices. In other words, you're looking for bargains. You're obsessed with prices. I can't make it come back down. Here we go. Oh, well, I think he just wants to tax everything to death. I don't think inflation was the reason. I think he just feels like, let's just spend everything in sight and tax the brains out of everyone. But yeah, I think those are for different reasons. He just sees like, he thinks that the government should be in charge of everything. And therefore we take the money away from the people and spend it on government. And therefore they'll always be in charge of our lives. I think that's what it's all about, not so much inflation. But anyway, what else do we have here? Confusion costs. Obviously, when prices are unstable, that means your planning is very difficult because you never know what everything will cost in the future. So they call this in economics confusion costs. So it's hard to decide what to do with your business if you can't be sure how much your wages will cost, how much your supplies will cost, how much you'll be able to sell your product for. So these are all going to obviously harm the economy as much as you can imagine. And then we have uncertainty costs. Borrowing and lending becomes very tricky because you don't know what kind of real rate of return you're getting when you invest money or how much you're paying when you borrow money. And that's going to reduce the amount of investment capital that's available. It'll become harder to get loans, and therefore people will have less consumption and businesses will invest less in the future. So all of these are obviously very, very costly. And this is in fact why the Fed's number one priority is to keep inflation under control. All the other considerations are secondary to keeping inflation from getting out of hand. And that tells you something. And that's true really of most of the Western major European banks too. Keep inflation low, especially the Bundesbank in Germany, because they've had such a horrible experience with hyperinflation there. They don't want that to ever happen again if they can avoid it. All right, now, since we're completely done with chapter 12, I'll tell you what we should probably do. I was going to have you do the chapters 10, 11, and 12 problem sets, and I still want you to do that. But you know what? Why don't we, while we're at it, let's see if we can at least try to also do the sample final next Thursday, because you'll have a week yeah, look at that. Oh, this is the wrong class, sorry. Yeah, so we'll have, yeah, since we'll have a full week. Now I'm not positive that I posted the sample midterm yet, though. Let me look at that. If not, I'll take care of it tonight or tomorrow. So let's set as our target to get through chapters 10, 11, and 12 problem sets and the sample midterm for the next time we meet, especially since we're going to have a Monday off anyway. Why not? So the 3 problem sets are definitely posted. I just showed you them a few minutes ago. I think I was still putting the finishing touches on the sample midterm, sample final rather. So that will have to wait probably another day or so, but I'll put it up there as soon as I can. And then we'll see what we can do. If we can finish them all in one class, that would mean that if we're done on the 6th, then there's really no need to have class on Monday the 10th. You could actually get yourself a day off that way and have more time to spend doing the actual final exam. So we'll see how that goes. I mean, we don't want to rush through it, but if we're able to do it, why not? You know, there's no point in diddling around. We might as well finish it all if we can. Okay, so in the meantime, I guess I'll just see you all. Don't forget, not Monday, but Thursday the 6th. Okay, so any last minute questions?
Thank you very much, Professor.
I'll see you next time.
Thank you.
Hey, you're welcome. Bye.
Thanks.
Okay.
Okay. Bye.
Yes, Monday at midnight. Yes.